All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome, board members and guests, to the Wednesday, April 22nd, 2020 meeting of the Placer County Transportation Planning Agency, Placer County Airport Land Use Commission, Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Service Agency, and the Placer County Local Transportation Authority. We're conducting this meeting via teleconference under Executive Order N-29-20, approved by Governor Newsom on March 17th, 2020. We appreciate your participation and patience with this new technology. A recording of this meeting will be posted on our website after the meeting. Regarding public comment, there will be multiple opportunities in this meeting for public comment. When I open up an item for public comment, please use the raise hand function to indicate that you would like to make a comment at this item. If you are joining the webinar on your computer, you can do so by clicking raise hand button in the middle bottom of the Zoom webinar window. If you're joining over the phone, you can do so by pressing *9. PCTPA staff will then call out individuals who have raised their hand, giving them permission to speak one by one. When you are called, please state your full name, your city of residence. You will then be given a maximum of 3 minutes to provide your public comment, and PCTPA staff will notify you when your 3 minutes are up. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties and you're unable to provide your public comment, please email your comments to Solby Sable, our clerk, at ssabol@pctpa.net. For board action, because this meeting is being conducted via teleconference, all votes will be roll call votes. Board members, we ask that you state your name prior to making a motion or seconding a motion for the record. Once an item has been moved and seconded, we will request that the clerk call the roll to vote. If you are also making a motion regarding an ordinance today, we are asking that you read the full name of the ordinance that you are making a motion on. All right, at this time, we will move on to the flag salute, and I would like to ask Jim Holmes to please lead us in the flag salute.
Okay, stand if you're able. Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Sylvia, would you be kind enough to call the roll?
Yeah, I would do that. Allard.
Here.
Baker.
Here.
Broadway.
Here.
Burris.
Here.
Holmes.
Yes.
Joyner.
Here.
Mackey.
Here.
Euler. We have a quorum.
All right, thank you. All right, we're going to move on to item C, approval of the action minutes for the March 25th, 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion? Sorry, who was that?
Joyner.
Allard, second.
Sylvie, would you call for roll call vote?
Allard.
Yes.
Baker.
Aye.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris.
Yes.
Holmes.
Yes.
Joyner.
Yes.
Mackey.
Aye.
Okay.
Thank you. Moving on to item D, agenda review. Does anybody have any items they would like moved on the agenda this evening or this morning?
I have none.
No.
No. Do I have a motion to approve the agenda order?
Mackey,
move approval.
second.
Sylvia, would you call for the vote?
Allard.
Yes.
Baker.
Yes.
Broadway.
Yes.
Burris. Holmes.
Yes.
Joyner.
Yes.
Mackey.
Aye.
Okay.
All right. Moving on.
Euler, aye.
Oh, Euler, you there?
Yeah, just for your information, don't give out the phone number in the future because I called in and it put me on a permanent mute and I couldn't unmute. So I was there for the original roll call. but unless you're online, you can't participate. So that phone number is worthless.
Okay, thank you.
All right. We'll go ahead and move on to item E, public comment. Now remember, if you are on the phone at this time, we're going to try *9. If you do have any issues getting on though, please email your comments to Solvi. And then as well, if you are joining online, we will need you to raise your hand using the raise hand function on Zoom. Do we have any public comment at this time?
Madam Chair, I'm not seeing any public comment at this time.
Okay. All right. We will go ahead and move along then. Moving on to item F, the consent calendar. These items are expected to be routine and non-controversial. They will be acted upon by the board at one time without any discussion. Any board member, staff member, or citizen may request that an item be removed from the consent calendar for discussion. Do we have any comment from the public on that? Any items that anyone would like to remove? Anything from the board?
I have none.
No.
Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Holmes moves approval.
Broadway second.
Okay.
Allard,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Mackey,
Aye.
Euler.
Aye.
All right. Moving to item G, consent calendar for the Western Placer Consolidated Transportation Services Agency and Placer County Transportation Planning Agency. These items are again expected to be routine and non-controversial, and they will be acted upon at one time by the board. Would anybody like to pull any items from the item G consent calendar?
I
No.
have none.
No.
Motion for approval?
Mackey, move approval.
Broadway motion approval.
Allard second.
Thank you.
Allard,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Mackey,
Aye.
Euler.
All right, thank you. Moving to item H, Placer County Local Transportation Authority Transportation Improvement Plan and Retail Transactions and Use Tax Ordinance.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike Lucan, Executive Director of PCTPA. I will be presenting the staff report and then also available here for if you have any questions is Cherry Springs with FM3. So dating back to the March board meeting, FM3, our polling consultant, presented their 9th poll, which showed an increase of 10 points in the city of Lincoln, a decrease in 3 points in the city of Rockland, and a decrease of 7 points in the city of Roseville. This survey was that was covered by our consultant, Kurt Balo, was performed at the start of the COVID crisis, and clearly the numbers did not support moving forward at that time. Following that, the COVID crisis hit in full force with sheltering in place, business closures, social distancing, and the economy has suffered greatly. In response, the board adopted a slow, methodical approach given the COVID crisis, but meeting the deadlines that were set forth by the Placer County Elections Office. Those actions including asking the cities, towns, and board of supervisors to consider and then approve the expenditure plan. To date, Roseville, Colfax, Rockland, Loomis, and yesterday, the board of supervisors have all approved that expenditure plan by a unanimous vote of 5-0 for each jurisdiction. We still have Auburn to go on April 27th, and Lincoln is scheduled for May 12th. A couple of the cities in their resolution of support have asked the board in the near future if this goes forward, to adopt guidelines to address the use of sales tax dollars for the city or for the county connecting roads, and to define the term of direct benefit clearly as we move forward. If, again, this matter moves forward and the voters were to vote positively in November of 2020. The next direction the board gave was to, on today, to conduct the first reading of the ordinance and conduct limited cost respectful outreach focused on COVID transportation precautions and the importance of transportation to a potential economic recovery, including working social media and possibly localized streaming media like Hulu and Netflix. The next step the board gave direction to back in March was that then on the 27th of May, we would conduct the second reading and adoption of the ordinance and authorize polling if the COVID conditions appear to be improving. If the board did that on the 27th of May, we would then initiate polling to be done again by FM3 with the assistance of staff and FSB Core Strategies. Lastly, we would present the polling at the June 24th meeting, and if the board decides not to move forward, we would rescind the ordinance. If the board decided to go forward, then it would submit a formal request to the Yolo County Elections Office to put that on the November ballot, and then the board is scheduled to take all election items. The Board of Supervisors is scheduled to take all election items forward the July 27th meeting. Clearly, the numbers would have to be there at the June meeting in polling for it to advance. Not advancing because this ordinance is in the sales tax plan is clearly needed for South Placer County. We would have to postpone them until the next regular election, which will be November of 2022. So what you have today in front of you, as the chair indicated, is Ordinance 20-01, the Placer County Transportation Authority Transportation Improvement Plan and Retail Transactions and Use Tax Ordinance for the South Placer County District. A very large name and mouthful. This ordinance was developed initially by our former executive director, Celia McAdam, and then amended over time by myself and our legal counsel, Deanne Gillick, with Sloan Sky. This ordinance has been reviewed by all city attorneys, town attorneys, county council, and edits were made based upon their comments. We then submitted this ordinance to the California Department of Tax and Fee Administration, who made additional edits to update that to current rules for implementing a sales tax in a local jurisdiction. As was stated earlier, a majority of the cities, towns, and the Board of Supervisors has approved the plan as required by state law. There's two conditions that have to be met. One is that a majority of those entities in number have to approve it, and then a majority of the population in the proposed district would have had to approve it. So technically right now we have achieved that threshold, although we still have Auburn and Lincoln to go. And those would be considered before the formal adoption of the ordinance, if that's the way the board decides to go. Within the ordinance, there are, it is very long and lengthy, and it is included as attachment 1 in your staff report. There are 24 sections to the ordinance to implement a district-based sales tax ordinance. There's a couple key sections. I won't go through each one, but a couple key sections I wanted to highlight. One is that we, at the board's prior urgent insistence and urgence, they have asked us to implement an independent citizens oversight committee. That is something that is common with other sales tax measures, not only in the county here, but throughout the state. But the board felt it's a necessary component to have a appointed group of citizens that would review the professional audit that is required for a potential sales tax measure. And then they would review our annual expenditures each year to make sure that they're complying with the ordinance, and then make their recommendation to the board of directors. The second really important section of the ordinance that I wanted to highlight was that there's a cap on administrative costs for PCTPA. We feel very strongly that we can stay within the 1% cap on those administrative costs for implementing a sales tax measure in Placer County for transportation. And then lastly, and probably unique to our ordinance, maybe in a couple other counties' ordinances, is we created what we term a district policy advisory committee, which would be a subgroup of the board of directors, advisory to the board of directors, which would include a board member from each of the district cities and one member of the board of supervisors, who would review specifically actions and expenditures within the district prior to it going on to the full board for consideration. The last component of the ordinance is the expenditure plan, and covered that the cities are, in the process, have considered and are in the final throes of considering that expenditure plan. That expenditure plan, in summary, includes 54% of the proposed sales tax dollars going to major highways and road programs, 10% going to rail and transit programs, 5% going to bicycle and pedestrian programs, and 25% going directly back to the cities in the district and to county connecting roads for expansion of those roadway systems and transportation systems in those areas. Lastly, we created a competitive projects program, which is a program for unanticipated projects of district-wide significance, and 5% is set aside for that. And then lastly, as mentioned earlier, 1% of the proposed funds would be needed to administer the entire program. That would include annual expenditures, formulaic expenditures, and bonding as needed to implement the program. Overall, we think it's a good ordinance. It was something that we put together based upon what 25 other counties have done throughout the state. We feel that we've improved upon their work and then tailored it specifically for a district instead of a county-wide measure. We are the first district, we would be the first district measure allowed under Assembly Bill 1413, which, as you know, allows the 3 counties, Placer, Solano, and San Diego, to do a district ordinance as a test for jurisdictions in California. Staff therefore recommends that after you take public comment, that you adopt the recommended action as presented in the staff report, which would be conducting the first reading and then directing us to post notices as indicated in the recommended action. With that, myself and Cherry Spriggs would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Beautiful. Thank you, Mike. Do we have any questions from the board?
I've got one for you, Mike, if I may. So you had mentioned a portion of these funds going to county connecting roads. The unincorporated county is not a participant in the district, so could you talk a little bit about that and the thinking behind that and how that would actually work with respect to ongoing maintenance and such?
Sure. So we have here in the county a traffic model, if you will, for South Placer County. And that traffic model is composed of our transportation system. And that system includes not only 80 and 65, but it includes other roadways such as Placer Parkway. And then the last component of that are these county connecting roads. And so traffic in our traffic model requires all of those components in order to move people around in South Placer County and then in and out of South Placer County. If we did not have those county connecting roads, we would have to essentially make incrementally those other major highways larger. And so when this model was developed, in the early stages of growth in South Placer County in the 1980s and 1990s, those county roads were deemed a major, and we all know that those roads are a major arterials that connect our communities. So when when the governor signed Assembly Bill 1413, it gave Placer County a choice of whether to include the unincorporated area or not to include the unincorporated area. And for us in Placer County, we couldn't include the unincorporated area because essentially that would mean going back to a county-wide ordinance, which did not fare well in 2016, as we all know. So we have this dilemma, if you will, that we need to expand, to reduce bottlenecks, to make small improvements on these county connecting roads. And so what we did is we set up a portion, much smaller portion dedicated to those county roads to make sure that they are in shape to be part of our transportation system. So that's kind of the thinking behind including a portion of that. I would say another aspect of that is with how sales tax is gathered in the county and in all counties. The county in our consultant for sales tax, HDL, in their estimation for the foreseeable future and even long term, most of the folks in the county unincorporated area, including Placer Ranch and Placer Villages and other developing communities in the unincorporated area, will do a majority of their shopping in the incorporated cities, mainly because you have things such as power centers that we have, whether it be Creekside Town Center in Roseville or the new power center in Roseville at Baseline Road and Fitiment Road, as well as the Auto Mall and the Galleria, that there really will not be more of those in the future. And so to an extent, the people living in those developing communities are going to do most of their shopping in the cities. So that's an ancillary part of this. And those county developing communities are going to support sales tax in the 3 cities in the district.
So that last bit is how you would respond to a constituent asking why the county has a benefit when they're not part of the district?
Yes, because in most of those developing communities, whether it be Placer Ranch or Placer Vineyards, or other, in the future proposed areas, they're mostly going to contain grocery anchored retail centers, which, to be perfectly honest, in HDL's opinion, they don't really create a great increase in sales tax. Because there's a lot of exempt purchases in those centers that do not pay sales tax because of peculiarities of state sales tax law. There's a couple of exceptions. There's some highway service commercial in the Placer Ranch Sunset West area that will have some sales tax, but again, most of those folks in those areas are going to be shopping in the cities. They're going to be buying their cars in the Auto Mall. They're going to be shopping at the Galleria, the Creekside Town Center, I don't know the name of it yet, but the Power Center at Baseline and Fitiment, which is slated to include Costco's and Home Depots and that type of thing. So, and then those other centers are also going to be in the other cities too, in Lincoln, and they are in Rockland, at Sierra College and those areas. So.
Right. So I may have missed it. Did you address the ongoing maintenance portion of this? Will the county be responsible for that? Will the district be responsible for that?
So our in total, the 25% set aside for the jurisdictions the primary purpose of that is to expand our roadways, because in the 2016 Measure M, at that time, we did not have the gas tax, or SB1, that was adopted a couple of years ago. And the primary purpose of SB1 is maintenance. And so the county, although maintenance is an allowable use under the ordinance for those areas, the primary purpose is to expand those roadways and to reduce bottlenecks and the like. There's also a very important component in the in all sales tax measures in the state. It's actually state law, and that's a very I want to say onerous, but a very strict requirement that no agency can supplant funds. And so that just because in this case, just because the county all of a sudden has $800,000 for maintenance of those roads, they actually, if they've dedicated funding towards those roads in the past, they have to continue to set aside that amount of funds for those roads into the future. So they can't say take away, they can't go, oh, well, we have $800,000 now to maintain roads in these areas. We'll shift that money over to public safety or OES or something else. That's not allowed. And if that were to happen, that jurisdiction receives $0. So there cannot be a shifting of or supplanting, as they term it, with any jurisdiction, including the county.
Okay, and then lastly, maybe you could talk to us a minute about the awkward way we're dealing with this ordinance itself. We're going to approve it with the possibility of withdrawing it in the future. Why not simply hold off, do the polling, decide how we're going to move forward from there, and either approve or disapprove the ordinance at that point in time?
So we are following the board's direction from the March meeting, and so that's kind of that is what we are kind of doing.
But a great deal has changed since that time.
Yes, although by the time we had the March meeting, we were in full COVID shelter in place when the board took that action. So yes, the economy has changed, and yes, we need to and we created these check-in periods for you to, and the purpose of today's meeting and the purpose of the next two meetings is really to assess, okay, well, should we make any adjustments to our path? But I think, and I'll reflect back on, we work very closely with the county CEO, city managers group, which is the county CEO and the city managers from throughout the county. And one of the things that they focused on was, and we heard some discussion, I think, about this at the last board meeting, is that it's hard to make a decision in a crisis. And so this slow, methodical approach allows the board to stop at any time, but it also allows the board to make a decision. Say, for instance, the governor was to lift the shelter in place, and the 3 states have this plan to recovery. Say that were to happen suddenly, and just as quickly as we went into COVID, it could potentially, we could exit from COVID. And this, at the same time, there's a really important thing going on, which I was going to hit upon in my executive director's report. But the federal government is seriously considering an infrastructure stimulus package, and that'll probably happen in the summer and fall. And the difference between that and ARA, which was back during the Great Recession, is our current administration feels very strongly that matching funds are going to be required. And so I think staff's recommendation and board's discussion and the city manager, CEO group want to have the ability, although things, are not looking that bright, want to have the ability, if things were to change, that we could pivot and proceed. If we were to stop today and then all of a sudden the recovery were to start, we would be dead. And that's because we couldn't do it, because the elections office has and the state law have very strict things that we have to do in preparation, and we don't have a lot of time. So, and we knew that kind of before COVID, that we have this very succinct process that we have to follow. So really all this does is give the board, if things improve, a ability to put this item on the ballot. It allows that as a choice. If you were to say today, stop, let's poll today, what that would mean is you've closed the door on that choice. The other thing with polling right now is we don't think, if we were to poll right now while we're in shelter in place, I could tell you without a doubt, and Cherry could probably tell you the same thing too, I know what the results are going to be. The results are going to be a large decrease from what we saw in March. Now, if we pull out of, and that's a big if we were to pull into recovery, we may see those numbers improve with the sales tax measure acting as a localized stimulus to match funds at the federal government. So again, this process just gives the board a choice, an ability to make a choice. So.
All right, thank you, Mike.
Yeah, if I may, this is Board Member Broadway, really tying into Mayor Joyner's question, Mike. A couple of thoughts and concerns that I have is, one, both Auburn and Lincoln councils have not, as you mentioned, had an opportunity to review this, yet we're looking at a first reading today. Secondarily, we've talked about the polling. We're going to work through the polling in June, late May, June, and then have that information available for our June meeting. What would preclude us from, as opposed to a first reading today, moving 2 and 3 off calendar to the 27th, providing both of those cities with the opportunity for their councils to review and essentially vote on and provide us with their thoughts on the ordinance. And then we have a first reading in May. In June, then we have the second reading, final approval if the decision is made then, and it aligns better with the polling. Is that a possibility? What would preclude us from doing so?
So when we set forth this path to potentially putting this on the ballot, we created a pathway that gave the board essentially a 1 month leeway, if you will, in case something were to either go wrong or the board wanted to take, an extra month to actually adopt things. And so we built a month of a month of flexibility into the process. So, and we've talked about this with our legal counsel, and she's here today, Deanne Gillick. We do have the ability for the board to postpone the first reading to May and, have the second reading in June and adoption in June. That is very possible, and that is legally allowed. The only downside to that is then you would have to do those in May and June. There would be very little leeway, mainly with the June meeting. So if, say for instance, on June 27th, there was one little issue that we had to grapple with on June 27th. and the board said, well, we need a little more time to consider this. What that would mean is we would have to have a special meeting on the 28th, 29th, or 30th to resolve that. We would adjourn, and Deanne can clarify this if needed, but we would have to adjourn that regular meeting and have a special meeting. So that's really the only downside. So certainly we could do that. And Deanne, I don't know if you want to add any more to that.
Hi, this is Deanne Gillick, General Counsel for the Authority. Just clarification, the approval of the ordinance must occur at a regular meeting. So there's the caution and the concern that if you push it back to the first reading in May, there's only one regular meeting left in June, and there cannot be substantive changes at the second approval. So if for some reason something came up where there's some substantive change in the ordinance, it must be approved at a regular meeting. So it's not that it can't, it's just a caution that the current schedule allows for that flexibility. But if you push it off to May and June, the board members just need to be aware, and the jurisdictions, of the requirement that the June regular meeting has to be the approval, and substantive changes create issues. So if there's any questions, I can help, but that's the guidance and the rules.
Yes, so just to clarify, if we were to do the first reading today and substantive changes did come up before the May meeting, would we have the ability to change it without an issue at that point?
At the May meeting, you would need to present the new substantive changes and then not approve it, but you'd have to wait till June to approve it. The approval has to be at a regular meeting, and there cannot be substantive changes at the meeting in which you approve it at.
Okay.
So we'd have to, do a continued regular meeting or something, out of the ordinary, but allowed within the rules.
So essentially what approving it today would do would get the first reading out of the way, and if any substantive changes did come up from any further discussion or further collaboration on this, it would give us a month buffer to be able to make those changes if necessary and still do the approval without causing any further issues.
Correct. So, both options are possible, but it's just giving us a little bit more, a little bit more window and flexibility, but either way is possible. Okay.
Ken, I think you're muted.
Yep, thank you. I appreciate that. So just to circle back on that, though, we can still have these discussions and provide the two remaining cities with the opportunity to bring this before their councils. I think my challenge would be, we have the first reading, we're essentially moving this forward without ever having had them provide their feedback. While I understand if we were to move this forward now, we have substantive changes that are presented by those two councils. We can come back and make that change. Well, we can do that whether we have the first reading today or not. I think for me, if I'm looking at it from their council perspective, is if we vote on it, essentially we, to an extent, are just saying their vote can be, because we have a majority already, essentially have very little impact. So I don't know that I'm too overly concerned about potentially moving that out. I think it provides them with the opportunity to vote on that prior to our body voting on it. And that's why I wanted to just bring that up as a potential approach, moving that first reading out to May with a second reading and final approval in June, which again would align with that final decision as well as a move forward and go or no go.
Thank you, Ken. I think I'd be more comfortable with that.
This is John Allard from Roseville. I just have a question. I heard substantive changes. What does substantive changes mean? Some of the local government bodies have already approved the ordinance as presented. If substantive changes are made, wouldn't those then have to go back to the bodies that have already approved it as written when it was presented to our councils?
Go ahead, Ian.
Okay, so there's two items that are being approved. One is the ordinance. What the jurisdictions are approving is the expenditure plan. The expenditure plan is an attachment to the ordinance. So this board is approving both the ordinance and the expenditure plan. The jurisdictions are reviewing the expenditure plan. You are correct. If there were significant, if there were substantive changes to the expenditure plan made, we'd have to evaluate whether or not that's aligned with what the jurisdictions approved or not, and whether, you know, that causes a concern. I was more focused on my comments on the ordinance, which they're related, but, you know, this body is reviewing the ordinance, and only the local jurisdictions are not reviewing the language of the ordinance. And I was focused on that language which you are approving and only the authority is approving. And so if there was any changes to the ordinance, then this body would have to, you know, consider that twice. It's my understanding that the expenditure plan, there's been some clarifications on the jurisdictions and some policy comments, but there's not been any substantive changes on the expenditure plan recommended or requested by the jurisdictions that have reviewed it to this point. And if I can clarify anything more, Mike, you could add anything on that, if my understanding is correct.
That is correct. The city of Rockland, as an example, I think I mentioned this in my presentation, but in their resolution, they recommended that the PCTPA board, and we said this to each city, if you were to, instead of making a change, recommend a guiding principle, because there is flexibility in the ordinance for a lot of things on the way it's, and that's done on purpose, because one, we do have unanticipated things in the near term, and then two, in the long term, it's hard to project out 30 years. You know, we don't know if we're going to have you know, autonomous vehicles or something else, or used vehicle miles traveled more extensively than gas tax. So we built flexibility into that. And so yes, today we've only made policy recommendations on how the board can implement. The ordinance really contains how to collect the tax, and then it has well, and it includes the expenditure plan, which has, you know, what percent we're spending on what type of improvement. So to date, we haven't had those kind of substantive changes like, oh, we should spend, you know, none of the cities have said, oh, well, you should spend, you know, 45% on transit versus, you know, what you have in there now. But yes, I mean that those substantive changes could come either from Auburn or Lincoln or the board itself, or you know, so that there is a risk to you know, basically boxing ourselves into just May or June. I would say, however, though, with Measure M back in 2016, that is what the board exactly did. It waited until those last two meetings, and it was fine. But it's just it's weighing the risk, if you will.
Deanne, I have a question. Are we able to do the first reading at a special meeting, or is it also restricted?
The requirement for the regular meeting is for the final approval. It is possible to do the first reading and to follow up with changes at a special meeting. The actual approval has to occur at the regular meeting. So it's, you know, feasible to do that if that's the desire or the need.
So potentially there could be a middle ground here where we could get the feedback from the other two jurisdictions and come back for a special meeting to address this item, and then continue on schedule while still allowing for a buffer.
That is feasible. If if at the May meeting something comes up and there needs to be some changes, you know, we could schedule a special meeting to handle those changes and to do the formal first reading with the final approval at the regular June meeting. So that is a possibility and feasible.
Is there any reason we would need to wait until the May meeting to do that special meeting for the first reading?
There's nothing legally, so it's just the practicality of getting that scheduled. But that legally, that's possible.
So realistically, we could go a couple weeks out from today, give the jurisdiction some time to go through and schedule a special meeting for that item and only that item.
Yes, we could do that.
Mike Supervisor Holmes here. When is it, this ordinance proposed to go to the Lincoln City Council?
So the ordinance never goes to any of the jurisdictions. It's just the
Expenditure plan, yes.
That is, we've been working with the city, and right now it's scheduled for May the 12th.
For May the 4th?
12th.
The 12th. Okay, thank you.
Do we have any further comments from the board? All right, seeing none, I'm going to go ahead and move to public comment. Do we have any comment on this item from the public?
Madam Chair, we do have a member of the public who would like to make a comment. I'm going to first recognize Michael Garabedian. Michael Garabedian, you now have permission to speak. As a reminder, please state your name and city of residence, and then you'll have 3 minutes to speak. You are yourself muted. You have to unmute yourself. Okay, you're now unmuted. Michael?
To Mike Garabedian, Placer County tomorrow. Thank you for this opportunity to address you under these dire circumstances out there. How many minutes do I have to speak?
3.
Well, I'll try to cover it quickly. We're opposed to this. The survey is a waste of time. I think that's being done with state money, and it should be given back to the state if that's all you're going to spend it on. You're asking for a vote, a head in the sands program. It will not relieve congestion. This vote was allowed by Assembly Bill 1413, and what it does is it allows the cities to attack the rural areas. It divides the county against itself. The Placer Parkway, this $500 million project, 15-mile project, that's needed right now when there's nobody out there on the streets. Going to the taxpayers for $500 million in sales tax increase over 30 years when people can't afford to pay their car payments. There's something here about the reality out there that seems to me is really missing. It really should reassess this. There's no congestion, out there. For the recovery is going to be, as you all know, if you're looking at your city budgets and the county budgeting, the recovery is not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen in enough time to make a rational decision on this. Times have changed radically, and I really urge you to just cease and desist for the sake of the public and for not looking foolish. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional public comment?
Madam Chair, I see none at this time.
All right, thank you. I will go ahead and bring it back to the board for action.
If I may, this is Board Member Broadway. What I would move is to move item H, Placer County Local Transportation Authority Transportation Improvement Plan and Retail Transactions and Use Tax Ordinance. I would move to move the introduction of the ordinance and waive the oral reading of the full ordinance off calendar, and to and again, Madam Chair, it may be up to your discretion to modify this, but I would say we move it now at least to the May 27th scheduled meeting, and then provide direction under item 3 for introduction in June at our meeting.
Will that work, Mike?
I think so. Deanne, just checking in with you with that.
Yeah, that's feasible to bring back the first reading at the May meeting and proceed from there.
I'll second the item.
before we call for a vote, just a matter of clarification, if we did want to we have the ability to call for that at this time.
We didn't get that, Trinity.
Can't understand her.
All right, can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
So as a matter of clarification, if we were to move forward with this vote at this time and it does carry, would we have the ability to schedule a special meeting prior to the May meeting if we wanted to address it sooner?
Yes. So I would, recommend that if, especially if something substantive were to come up at those council meetings, that would likely be the thing that would initiate a special meeting. And we would work very quickly to schedule a special meeting, locally using this same platform with the board. So we don't anticipate a special meeting at this time, but if something were to happen at those two council meetings, that would be the most likely thing to cause us to want to have a special meeting.
Okay, thank you. That's my number one concern is if something does come up. I don't want us to be back in the order. All right, we have a motion and a second. So we call vote.
Allard,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Mackey,
Aye.
Euler.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Great, thank you. Moving on to item I, fiscal year 2019-2020, overall work program and budget amendment number 2.
Good morning, members of the board. This is Luke McNeil-Kerr, Deputy Executive Director at PCTPA. Can you hear me okay? So in your packet is amendment number 2 to the fiscal year 2019-20 overall work program and budget. I'm just going to walk through some of the key changes in the work program. That includes work element 23, the South Placer Transit Project. This is to study the feasibility of bus service from Lincoln to Sacramento Light Rail. We also have changes to work element 43. This is the Highway 65 widening to pursue a state grant if a local funding match is secured in 2020. Work element 46, this is the mobility action plan. The board has an upcoming item in your packet that you're going to consider the consultant contract. We also have changes to work element 47, Riego Road baseline road widening. This includes completing a planning study to pursue local, state, and federal funding. And then lastly, work element 60, this is the regional transportation funding strategy. We have changes to reflect cost to date and also adding a potential polling survey in June. I want to take a little bit of time here to talk about the budget. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty right now. However, I just want to mention that PCTPA has been around 7 total staff since 2001, almost 20 years. And we also have built up a reserve funding around 12% of the current budget. So considering this, we were able to balance the budget for this fiscal year, but for next year, we are already looking at reductions in revenue, and we will be bringing back that revised budget to you in May. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, do we have any questions from the board?
No.
I have none.
All right, do we have any comments from the public?
Madam Chair, there's a member of the public who would like to speak.
All right.
Michael Garabedian, you are now unmuted and allowed to talk. You have 3 minutes.
Mike Garabedian, again for Placer County tomorrow. Thank you again for this opportunity. My suggestion would be that along with this work program, staff be directed to reassess, begin to reassess what the program should and could be in the near future and the farther future, given the current crisis. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any additional comments from the public?
Madam Chair, there are none at this time.
All right, thank you. Bring it back to the board for action.
Chair Barris, I'll move approval. This is Supervisor Holmes.
Mackey, second.
All right, thank you. Sylvie, will you call for a vote?
Allard,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
Yes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Mackey,
Aye.
Euler.
Aye.
All right. Motion passes. Moving on to item J, final Placer Sacramento Gateway Plan.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the board. David Melko, and I will be having this item. So we're asking the board to take 3 actions today. We're asking the board to accept the Gateway Plan, to amend the Placer County Short Range Plan to include the South Placer County Transit Project, and to authorize the Executive Director to submit a Solutions for Congested Corridor Program grant application in partnership with Caltrans and SACOG to the California Transportation Commission. So brief overview today. We've been at this for 14 months. This is a multimodal corridor plan that basically includes State Route 65 and Interstate 80, State Route 65 from downtown Lincoln to Interstate 80, and from Auburn to downtown Sacramento. The planning effort included a partnership strategy team of 4 members of Caltrans, Capital Corridor, PCTPA, and SACOG staff. It also involved a project development team of 14 agencies and jurisdictions that operate transportation and transit services within the corridor. We were before the board in October in a workshop format, and we were before the board in December with the draft plan. The draft plan was released for a 50-day public comment period. We received comments, and those comments, to the most practical extent, have been addressed within the plan. The final plan is currently available at more80choices.com. So if you visit that website, you will be able to see the plan, including the executive summary, which is provided as part of your board packet. We have with us today Ron Milam with Fair and Peers. Ron will be doing an overview of the Gateway Plan, as well as the priority projects for the Cycle 2 application. And upon completion of Ron's presentation, we'll come back and I'll talk a little bit about the South Placer Transit Project and the actions associated with that, and then we'll wrap up and then open it for public comment. So with
David,
that, I'd like to introduce Ron.
David, just very quickly before Ron starts, this is Kirk. I've got to jump off. I apologize, but I've got another one of these things to get on at 10. So I'm exiting. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kirk.
Okay, good morning, everyone. This is Ron Milam from Fair and Peers. It's a pleasure to share the final plan with you. I'm going to just provide some highlights so you can get a sense for what's in the plan and the specific projects that are recommended to be advanced for Cycle 2 funding as part of the Congested Corridors program. The graphic you have in front of you right now shows you the Gateway Corridor. As David described, it does extend from Sacramento to Auburn to Lincoln, and it does include at least a 2-mile buffer either side in terms of the immediate corridor. And this is intended to capture all the parallel key facilities that are important for travel in the corridor. Let's go to the next slide. So in terms of the actual contents of the plan, here's a brief overview of the table of contents. Many of the sections here are what you typically see in a multimodal corridor plan. What I want to highlight, though, about this plan that I think is unique is that previous plans tended to focus exclusively on congestion relief and often failed to produce that outcome. They only focused on supply side actions such as adding lanes, and didn't really think about some of the other options such as adding travel choices so people could actually avoid congestion or gain extra reliability in their travel because they had a mode available to them that wasn't influenced by the congestion on the roadway network. So this plan's a little bit different. It looks at the actual causes of congestion, and it looks at a more expanded set of solutions. Let's go to the next slide. So next slide. There you go. Thank you. Just one example of the unique analysis approach here. If you think of how congestion is normally defined, the cars are usually moving too slowly. But this plan and the congestion corridors program itself are different. They are looking for solutions that not only address the congestion, but also deal with the travel choices that people have in the corridor. If we could go back one slide to the seat utilization graphic, please. This particular graphic that hopefully you'll see here in a second shows how we used a completely different metric to analyze the corridor performance. The corridor performance was looked at in terms of how many seats were available in the peak hour, in the peak direction. This example is near the junction of Business 80 and Interstate 80. And we looked at all the different modes operating at that particular location, again, looking at the 2-mile buffer. And we had local bus, the Capital Corridor Rail, commuter bus, SAC RT light rail, as well as the freeway itself. And a common thing we see here is that we have relatively low seat utilization. So a big part of the congestion problem we have in the corridor is because the available seats aren't being occupied. And so we wanted to look at strategies that could help occupy those seats to the extent feasible before we invested in the larger, more fixed capacity solutions. In a growing area like Placer County and Sacramento County, you're not going to necessarily avoid expanding the network as the area grows, but we did want to make sure we're using the existing system as efficiently as possible before you invested in those additional facilities. Let's go to the next slide. This next slide is going to just be a visualization of the almost 150 individual projects that make up the plan. Now, the plan started with the Metropolitan Transportation Plan and Sustainable Community Strategy developed by SACOG, but then took a more refined look at this particular corridor and study area to help prioritize which projects would be compatible with that congested corridors program and could potentially qualify for funding under that program in the future. And you can see we've got not just roadway projects here, we have transportation systems management that includes ramp meters at almost all the interchanges in the corridor. We've got transit projects, including a new service from Lincoln to Sacramento, as well as bicycle and pedestrian projects where we're trying to complete the regional network and provide new opportunities to get across the freeways, which can serve as barriers to bicycle and pedestrian travel. Let's go to the next slide. As part of a plan like this, we had to pay close attention to the CTC guidelines, that's the California Transportation Commission guidelines, with regards to the type of plan we were preparing, but also paying attention to the very specific criteria they'll be using to evaluate projects for their Cycle 2 and future Cycle 3 grant application opportunities. I don't have time to go through all the different performance metrics. There's a number of them. But I wanted to point out just a couple of things. This plan produces not just reductions in future travel delay, but it actually increases travel time reliability, in part because it provides new travel choices for residents and workers. One key metric to note is that people living or working within a half mile of reliable transit increases from about 129,000 under existing conditions to over 500,000 with the plan. This is an example of what I mentioned earlier of giving people choices to avoid congestion, in this case, providing reliable transit options in the corridor. Next slide. This next slide will show you the priority projects that have been identified, and we have 8 of them, and it's a variety of projects across multiple jurisdictions. As David pointed out, there's 14 member jurisdictions as part of our project development team, and they work together with the strategy team to come up with these projects. The next slide will show you the physical distribution of these project locations, so we can go to that slide. These projects add up to a cumulative funding requests of probably about $65 million. And these projects close multimodal network gaps. They help to construct arterial complete streets improvements on the parallel facilities to the freeway, expanding the corridor transit options, while also improving transit capacity and service quality. Now, each of these projects has to be subjected to the grant application criteria, so there is more work to be done. You look at the next slide, the immediate steps that we'll be doing after board acceptance of the plan is working on the actual Cycle 2 grant application that's due here in June. But we're not finished at that point. You still have to perform ongoing monitoring of the plan, and there is a subsequent step intended to develop more of an action plan and set of models and tools that can help advance projects through the project development process. If you think of the process to create a project and get through its design, environmental review, and then ultimately the construction, that's a multi-step process. And so there are more steps that can be done to advance future projects as part of Cycle 3 or subsequent projects. Let's go to the next slide. In terms of my final comment, I want to recognize that PCTPA staff played an extraordinary role in this project. This is a major regional scale project. It's also one of the first multimodal corridor plans of its type here in the region or in Northern California for that matter. And despite the PCTPA being a relatively small staff compared to the largest regional agencies that we're dealing with in the corridor, they took the leadership role on this project and helped to coordinate all 14 agencies and not just achieve consensus on the plan, but achieve consensus on the projects to advance for competitive funding. So I want to give my personal thanks to David and Luke in particular, and Mike and Kathleen for all the help. They did a tremendous job for an agency and staff size. They definitely were leaders in terms of a plan of this scale for the region. With that, we have, I think, a little bit of time for some questions.
All right, do we have any questions or comments from the board? Anything from the public?
Madam Chair, I would like to address one other part of the staff report. We also are requesting the board today to amend the Placer County Short Range Transit Plan to include the South County Placer Transit Project. That's a project that will involve an intercity express bus service from Lincoln, serving Roseville Galleria and hospitals in Roseville, and connecting with regional transits, light rail station at Watt I-80. This project requires the acquisition of buses, and the project is a priority project within the Solution for Congested Corridor grant application. And as such, it necessitates an amendment to the Placer County Short Range Plan to include the acquisition of the buses, as well as make the project eligible for future operating funds, whether it be at local, state, or federal levels. And with that, I'd like to just wrap up by indicating that Gateway Plan doesn't stop at this particular point. It's an ongoing process. And there, as Rhonda noted, there are over 150 projects within the plan, and each agency will seek to advance their projects through their project development phases, and each agency will seek opportunity for funding through future cycles. The next agenda item on the action plan is a key next step in the implementation of the Gateway Plan. And with that, we would recommend that the board take action with authorizing the executive director to submit a grant application in partnership with Caltrans and SACOG, and amend the County Short Range Plan and accept the Gateway Plan. With that, I'd be glad to take any questions.
Madam Chair, a quick question for the executive director, if I may. Don't worry, Mike, I plan on supporting this today, but I'm curious. We appear to be just marching forward with the pre-COVID plan, and certainly with social distancing for the near term, mass transit, public transit is going to be something quite different. I don't know that folks, other than those who absolutely must, are going to have a desire to ride it. Are we trying to look out to the future on this and see how this has changed the use of mass transit and how we might have to adjust our programs in the future?
Sure. So I guess a couple comments there. One is, we, in order to be eligible for the competitive programs that the state has we have to do a multimodal congestion management plan that does reduce vehicle miles traveled. And so the transit components in these are a necessary component to achieve that. The other thing I would say is that our kind of again back to our South Placer traffic model, and we have to essentially implement everything. So we're not just building roads. We are adding a significant amount of new transit service to Placer County, and we are adding more alternative transportation modes as well as looking at some of the intelligent transportation systems that this plan outlines. So we kind of have to do everything in order to make it work. But having said that, I think, you are correct that two things. One is COVID will change things. No doubt about that. We are in the future going to be looking at transit, I think, in a different way, especially with local service in Placer County. And as we add the, hopefully we are able to successfully expand the Capital Corridor service, I think you're going to see public transit significantly, other than our commuter service, which is very successful. You're going to see local service in Placer County, and you're already seeing this in areas like Citrus Heights and West Sacramento, which are implementing micro transit as an example. You're going to see transit change significantly, and I think COVID just adds another layer on top of this that we're going to have to grapple with public transit. I'm very confident that we're going to get through COVID, but I think, we're going to have to probably set up some protocols with transit, and maybe change the way we do transit to prevent that and future pandemic impacts. And so I think the answer is we're going to have to do transit differently. COVID is just one more reason why we have to reassess how we do transit in Placer County and throughout the Sacramento region and throughout the nation. There's components of transit that flat and simply do not work, and we have to address those. And the first step, this South Placer County Transit project is actually a very different way of doing transit in Placer County. This is something where we're taking we haven't really done, except for our commuter routes, we really haven't done express service. So this is going to be limited and stops to a route, but with frequent service that connects Lincoln to the hospital complexes, Kaiser and Sutter, and then down to light rail. We've never done that kind of thing before, and that's the kind of thing that we have to look more at is, where are people going? And that's what this plan is doing, is it's saying, oh, well, forget these artificial boundaries between transit systems in Placer and Sacramento County. All they've done is create, artificial stops like the Lewis Orlando train or bus transit center, right at the county line between Placer and Sacramento. There's no reason why that is there. The only reason it's there is because of the financial constraints on public transit required us to meet at the border of two counties. It's a place, nobody is going to a gas station on Riverside Boulevard. The only reason we're going there is because it met our needs, but really we have to take a look at changes. Why don't we let RT come into Placer County, and why doesn't Roseville Transit, why can't it go into Sacramento County? So I think this plan is that first step of really looking at transit and all of our other modes differently so that people use those other modes and don't, our buses are not empty. So sorry about the long-winded answer, but that's kind of our staff and consultant team's approach with this, is looking at things differently.
Understood. I think I would caution us in the new reality of COVID to move forward with an eye on that. I think it was Eisenhower that said, every plan breaks down the moment you meet the enemy. Well, we've met an enemy that kind of negates the notion of rideshare in my mind for the foreseeable future. And with social distancing 6 feet apart on public transit, I don't know how you're going to do that and how you're going to overcome the sense of mass transit being perhaps less than clean and less than safe. I think we're going to have to address all of those issues as we march forward. So just a few thoughts.
Mike, if I may, board member Joyner, PCTPA is also participating with the Sacramento Area Council of Governments and El Dorado County Transportation Commission on a next generation transit study. And we actually had the interviews during COVID, so we did it remote via Zoom and included that as a question for some of our potential consultant teams. Like, what are you seeing with this? And how do you think it's going to affect it? So it's certainly something top of mind, and we're watching some of the bigger regions who have sort of pulled back their transit service and are looking to deploy in a new and better way. And I'll also add that with the abilities of data now, we can kind of see how people's travel patterns have changed. Like, who are the people who are still riding transit no matter what, because it's their only option and they're essential to our society. And so I think there's opportunity, but I agree with you.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any additional comment or question from the board? Anything from the public?
Madam Chair, there is a member of the public who would like to speak.
Okay.
Michael Garabedian, you are allowed to talk and should be unmuted. Hold on. Michael, I think you need to unmute yourself.
Done. Well, thank you again. Michael Garabedian for Placer County Tomorrow. As you'll note at the top of the screen, the 4 agencies that are the partners in this program. I'm sure you're all aware, but I think it should not go without mention that PCTPA had the administrative lead on this project, and I suppose will continue to. I think it's a marvelous use of staff, but also the role of PCTPA, of the consultant, especially SACOG, and the participating entities really deserves credit for looking hard to find solutions. And we really congratulate you for this. I'm just learning today about the study with El Dorado, the exploration of that project, which should probably look north too, perhaps as far as Butte County, in terms of the rail corridor through Lincoln. Anyway, thank you for this project. Look forward to it having an opportunity actually to be adjusted in the coming couple months. Thank you.
All right, do we have any additional public comment?
Madam Chair, there's no other public comment at this time.
All right, thank you. I will go ahead and bring it back to the board for action.
I'll move approval of the item. Joyner.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Sorry, who's second?
Holmes, Director Holmes.
Thank you, Director Holmes. Sylvie, would you please call a vote?
Allard. Do I hear Allard?
Allard, yes.
Okay. Baker?
Aye.
Broadway?
Yes.
Burris?
Yes.
Holmes?
Yes.
Joyner?
Yes.
Mackey?
Aye.
All right, beautiful. Motion carries. Moving on to item K, Placer Sacramento Action Plan Contract.
Good morning. This is Kathleen Hanley, Assistant Planner here at PCTPA, and this is my item. It's been referenced a few times, but what's here for your consideration today is authorization for the Executive Director to negotiate and sign a contract for the Placer Sacramento Action Plan. You'll notice this plan has a very similar title to the previous item, the Placer Sacramento Gateway Plan. Essentially building on the success of this gateway plan and trying to move these projects forward to funding and eventually hopefully to construction. This project, the Placer Sacramento Action Plan, utilizes a Caltrans planning grant to fund a planning effort that will essentially pick up where the gateway plan ends and pull us through to the next funding cycle in 2022. So the requested action is authorization to negotiate and sign up to $1 million. Currently, we have about $650,000 from a Caltrans Sustainable Communities Planning Grant, and PCTPA staff will continue to look to our partners on these gateway and action plan projects to fill that gap in the funding. What the action plan will entail is additional analysis, and to answer Director Joyner's question a little bit more, we see this planning effort as a really good opportunity to say, okay, we set out, we put 150 projects, we're going for 8 for funding this year, and looking at those remaining projects, which ones make sense in this new context, and what more analysis can we do in this new context to understand. This project also includes some really innovative outreach, including virtual reality components. They provide a great tool to help it continue to educate the public on what these projects mean for them and what they could look like. And especially in this new world where having a traditional public meeting and getting all together around boards and putting Post-it notes on them seems less and less likely. I think this virtual reality will give us a lot of ability to stay engaged and understand how the members of our community are looking at their transportation system moving into the future. So we released a request for proposals on February 10th, and we received 4 proposals on March 20th. An evaluation group consisting of PCTPA, SACOG, and Caltrans District 3 met and discussed the 4 proposals. A Mark Thomas team was determined to be the highest ranking proposal. So PCTPA staff would like to engage in negotiations with the board's consideration with the Mark Thomas team. The Mark Thomas team is headed up by Zach Sevilla, who's a fellow Roseville native. So we're looking forward to working with them. At this point, I'm happy to take any questions from the board.
All right, thank you, Catherine. Do we have any questions or comments from the board?
I have none.
All right, do we have any comment from the public?
Madam Chair, I see none at this time.
All right, thank you. Do we have any motions from the board? Bring it back for action.
Chair Burris, I move approval.
Second.
All right,
Mackey.
Okay. Allard,
Yes.
Baker,
Yes.
Broadway,
Yes.
Burris,
yes.
Holmes,
Yes.
Joyner,
Yes.
Mackey.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Moving on to item L, executive report.
Thank you, members of the board. We'll make this short as we have a couple of members that need to be on other Zoom meetings. So very quickly, want to report that we've talked a lot about COVID and some of our actions today, but it is definitely having an impact upon operations at PCTPA. PCTPA, with the recent update of the Placer County Public Health Officers directive and order, is deemed an essential business, as most local government is in South Florida, in Placer County. However, we are also exercising the further directive, which recommends that to the extent feasible, our staff will be telecommuting and working from their homes as much as possible, and that's what we have implemented. All of our staff are working at home and only come into the office as needed. Kathleen Hanley on our staff has done a wonderful job in setting up our telecommunication systems and computer systems to seamlessly work from our homes. So kudos to her, to a great and difficult job that she did. And we haven't quite completed. We have a couple things left with our financial system and other things to implement. She's done a wonderful job, and some of our other staff assisting her, Solvi and Shirley and others, to make that happen. So we are working at home, and we are working very effectively at home. We are communicating maybe even more than we did when we were in the office, with day-to-day communications via telephone or teleconference. And then lastly, we have implemented a system with bank transfers, which will now be done by email approval as needed, and board members who have authorized to be a second signature on those, we are now doing that by email as those needs come up. The second thing I wanted to mention is you may have noticed today that we did not have our public member aboard, and that is because Jamie Wright, our public member from the Tahoe area, has submitted her resignation. And in this case, it's a very good thing because, we'll certainly miss her, but she is now working for Placer County Transit, one of our key partner agencies, working with Will Garner, their transit manager. So she won't be far away. So we have then indicated to the clerk of the Board of Supervisors this vacancy, and the board will then start a recruitment process for her replacement. The next thing I wanted to mention is federal stimulus. I mentioned this in our report today, but we and Placer County Water Agency have been authorized by this county CEO, city managers group to gather shovel-ready projects in the areas of transportation, healthcare, electricity, sewer, water, and biomass to get ready for a potential federal stimulus bill. We've now had all of our agencies participate in submitting projects on this needs list, and we're happy to report that we have over $1 billion in shovel-ready projects. I don't think we've ever had that to that degree before. And so we have a lot of projects that are ready in case we need funding. We've created a working group to implement this, which includes, as mentioned, PCWA and PCTPA, but also the county governmental affairs staff and the city of Roseville governmental affairs staff are going to participate in this working group to kind of make recommendations, if you will, to guide this. We are going to be scheduling the representatives that are on the SACOG board from Placer County. That group has been meeting with our local delegation on other issues. We will probably, we will utilize them to set up a meeting with McClintock and LaMalfa to basically explain what we're doing. And then future meetings will be to present them with our project lists. In terms of regional work with the stimulus, our projects will then be fed into a regional database, which is being collected by SACOG and the Regional Water Association and maybe others in other areas, but we will participate in that. I mentioned we have $1 billion worth of projects. That's nice, and we're proud to have that many shovel-ready projects, but we will never get $1 billion in funding, and so we will have to go through a process to prioritize those projects. Something like along the lines of having the top 2 projects by each agency and by each interest area is probably a more realistic list, and we'll be working on that in the coming months. And we're thinking that at the earliest, we'll probably have a federal stimulus package in front of Congress in the summer, but it could be as late as fall. They're likely to block grant those funds to the state or federal agencies, which has always been a concern of ours because that adds a level of bureaucracy. But it's probably the likely method that they will use, and we and our partners, and even up to things like the National Association of development organizations. We're working with them to streamline federal and state regulations. So that's a big project we're now participating and leading with PCWA. I just wanted to mention real quickly that some upcoming things Luke mentioned, our next overall work plan, our 2021 work plan. We will be presenting that to you in months. Staff is proposing some rather large cuts to expenses because we see a very likely large reduction in local transportation funds or LTF funds that will affect each public agency and transportation program in every city and county, and it will have an impact upon PCTPA as well. And then as we discussed, we'll have the transportation sales tax before us. And as I close, I wanted to mention we are meeting today on Administrative Professionals Day. And so I'd like to end by recognizing two very important people in our office. We would not survive without them. And they've done a wonderful job this year and many years prior. And those two people being our Planning Administrator, Board Secretary, Solvi Sable, and our Fiscal Administrative Officer, Shirley LeBlanc, who we would not, PCTPA would not be what it is without them. So
Here.
with that, I'll conclude, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Hopefully they both recorded that, and when it comes time for their review, we'll play it back for you.
Absolutely.
Did.
So thank you.
All right, do we have any comments from the board? All right, anything from the public on that? No?
Madam Chair, there's no public comment at this time.
All right, do we have any board direction to staff? All right. Oh.
I just said stay safe.
All right. Well, it looks like we have some informational items. Any members of the public that would like to comment on those items? Catherine? I assume we don't.
We do not, Madam Chair.
Perfect. All right.
Great job, Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.